And now we have nothing to say.
All right, so I am going to call the Capital Planning Committee to order for January 25th, 2021, 7:31 p.m. Hi, Kathy. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order disposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend the meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event they were unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right, I will note that all members are present. We are going to skip number 2. Andrew has promised those for the next meeting and roll right into Chairman's update. The first is, and Lisa, I'll certainly yield the floor to you if you have anything to add, is my understanding at last week's Board of Selectmen meeting, the Conservation Commission presented their regular update, and they have identified a potential capital item related to Breakneck Hill. In my mind, I question whether it's capital or just an article, but I think we'll need to learn more about it. For now, I think this is just an FYI, but Lisa, I think we'll really look to the board, at least this is just my impression of, how you plan to move this forward. And if it is deemed to be a capital item, this committee will weigh in. But if you deem it to be more of an article, then obviously only the parties that weigh in on just all articles should weigh in. So it's more of an FYI. Lisa, anything to add?
No, Jason, that's perfect. The board just wanted capital to be aware that this might be something that's coming forward. And, until they get the delineation and whatnot done, we won't know what the actual costs are. But I'll bring any information obviously back as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
And is there a chance it's FY22?
Mark, you may want to answer that one. I don't know what discussions you may have had since.
I haven't had any specific discussions yet with Melissa. I guess it depends how quickly the board wants to move. I don't think the situation is going to change one way or the other. It's how quickly the board wants to move on that. So to be determined, Jason.
Okay. And everyone is aware that town meeting was delayed, correct? Okay. That'll be relevant, especially once we get down to FY22 capital items. Anything on that for Lisa, Mark? All right. Next one is on the townhouse. At the last meeting, I had referenced that John Parent was pursuing certain grants to hopefully offset a certain piece of what may hopefully be funded by town meeting as a CPA article related to all the townhouse renovations that we've talked about at length. My understanding is we are not eligible for that grant or series of grants to both hold the preservation restriction as well as to fund a piece of the project. And there's work that the Historic Commission would have to do to make us eligible. And my understanding is it's potentially a multi-year program. So John was going to write something up. I haven't seen it, but I just was going to hopefully make a referral to historical and copy of the Board of Selectmen, just as, we're still proceeding, but, obviously there will be other items that have historical, need historical backing in the future. So to the extent that they can, look into it and do the appropriate due diligence, that would be helpful. But there's nothing this committee can do. It's clearly outside of our bounds, but I just wanted to, because I made that comment on the record, I wanted to bring it back here as part of our meeting. Any comments, questions on that?
Jason, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So in talking about potential grants and whatnot, is this something that would qualify, and maybe Mark even knows the answer to this, for the green energy grants that John is able to get? I mean, we're talking windows and whatnot. Does this qualify in any way?
I think it depends on the timing, Lisa. I know that a lot of the green projects that John is trying to finish up, at least for the next round, deal mostly with some of the remaining low-hanging fruit in the schools, with, you know, changing out some of the lighting and things of that to make it more energy efficient. I think it's probably a year or so away before we could put in for something like that, but it doesn't hurt to ask. John's got a very good relationship with the green communities folks at the state level. And if it's something that we can put in for, we absolutely will.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, can I make sure I understand the question you just asked Mark? Because I don't understand his answer. Did you just ask whether the Green Communities Grant might be able to pay for the cost of getting the conservation easement on the townhouse? Is that what you're asking?
No, if just to cover any portion of the replacement of the windows and whatnot, so we're not getting as much from CPC. Kathy, I hadn't thought about if that could potentially be an option.
Well, I wouldn't think it would be. That's why I was questioning. I wouldn't think they would be in their bailiwick. But Lisa, I know you were never on CPC, right? You were just open space?
Yep.
Right. So you may not know the answer, but does CPC normally also consider the cost of funding the cost of getting the easement placed?
So on the golf course, for instance, on the CR that was done there, the fee for, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, the fee for SVT came out of CPC.
Correct.
Okay. So
The library, I think, is where they've learned the lesson. I don't think it was contemplated.
They forgot it, right?
Yeah. So the key is going to be whatever warrant article comes forward and what number goes in there. Hopefully, it'll either be part of their contingency or part of the total amount that's in the actual wording of the article. So it's just something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I know I'm getting for a field work. But one final question: how is the library going to get paid for at this point? Where is it going? It definitely wasn't part of their budget. So where are they getting the money to do it? Are they going to ask for that separately? Does anybody know, Mark?
Book sale? I'm not sure. I don't. I think they've got to find someone to hold it first, and then see what that cost is going to be, and then back into it that way, Kathy. So I think that's still up in the air.
Okay, sorry, Jason.
Yeah, and specific to that project, I don't have an answer, but I do know that they take whatever numbers they're given and add a contingency to it. And Mark and I lived through that on the golf course because it obviously impacted the public safety numbers. So they do add a contingency that I think is what I'll call healthier than what you typically would add as a construction contingency. I don't remember the exact numbers, so I'm not going to guess, but obviously something we know to look for, and obviously we'll know the answer to your question eventually, Kathy. I just don't know when.
Jason, was the grant that John was talking about, was that the Mass Historical Project Fund one?
Yes.
Which they would hold the preservation restriction, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for the project. So maybe we can apply, I think it's in March, maybe we can apply for something in that building just to get the restriction, then we can add whatever future stuff onto it.
If you want to run point, that the historical piece is way outside of my
I will
if
I
you
will
want to
talk
run
to-
point and bring back an update, I will add it to the next agenda.
Yeah, I'll talk to my wife who's on historical.
Yeah, and then but feel free to circle back with John because he was very upset. Not because he thought he had found something and he started to do a lot of work, and then obviously there's certain rules and stuff like that. So even if there's something we can do that's maybe not what we fully expected, I think no one's going to argue with that.
Replace the front door. And that's it.
All right.
All right, cool.
All right. So we're going to move on to school research subcommittee update and discussion of NESDEC reports and next steps. I am going to attempt to summarize and Kathy is going to keep me honest and add anything else. Then we'll entertain questions on where we stand from the committee. My only request is this item in itself, we could sit here for the next 3 nights and discuss and get nowhere. So I apologize if I cut anyone short at some. I'm just going to measure where we're at. But I do think it's an important topic to spend some time here, because I do think there will be actions for us to start to take. And I know, especially given, I'll call it the tease that we had with Woodward right before the holidays in terms of, Jeff Shaw's report out from context. I know everyone's creative juices are flowing. So let me bring you up to speed on where we're at, and then we'll go from there. So as many of you saw, and I've distributed both on email and in OneDrive, the NESDEC report. This is the raw report that was presented to the school committee as well as our subcommittee on the 13th. There was no back and forth prior to the meeting of any feedback from any member of the community, including, from what I can tell from last week's meeting, the superintendent and his team. What I will say is this is not the final report. There are definitely some items in there that are incorrect or need to be clarified. I think it's probably a combination of both of those. But directionally, I would say it would point to we're probably at the floor of our school enrollment for the next 10 years and not the ceiling. But that ceiling does not appear to go as high as the peak that existed in the early 2000s in this community when we had the 4th school constructed. Now, it also does not include, and I know Kathy has mentioned this before, unpermitted projects. This is only permitted projects that, are not in litigation and are known at this point. So if you look at it, it's built primarily off of census data, building permits, and how fast houses are rolling over. And the general assumption, how fast the houses are rolling over, is if someone goes, there are a few, like what I'll call 55 and older type communities that have been constructed in town recently. The general assumption they're making is that a Southborough resident that maybe does not have school-age children anymore is selling that property and moving into, another house in town. So you really aren't and then a family from outside the community is moving into that, 3, 4, 5 bedroom house with school-age children. So that's how they were viewing some of those 55 and older type communities. So it really was adding to the system because you're giving someone else an option, and place to go. Maybe I want to pause there for just questions on the NESDEC report itself. But, and Kathy, why don't you weigh in on anything on the NESDEC report before we walk through kind of where we're going to go?
I don't think I can add. I mean, everything you said is perfectly accurate. So let's see what the questions are.
Okay, so let's go around the horn and see if anyone has any questions on. It sounds like a lot of people either listen to the subcommittee meeting or listen to the school committee meeting where this was discussed. But are there any questions that anyone wants to raise here? I'll start. Andrew, Faf.
Sure. So, I mean, I watched the video. I thought this is very high and conservative. To your point, I think this is a very high ceiling. I think the actual number is probably significant lower. I think there's a couple other analytics that I would like to run that they were missing. I think looking at the town census and actually looking at what age people are currently at in the town, and then trying to extrapolate from there, which I think he was missing.
So on that point, the subcommittee did raise that last week, and the superintendent agreed and was bringing that back to the NESDEC team. So
yeah. And if he needs help doing it, and then we can append. I mean, my thought is look at the actual ages of kids, right? Not just birth years, and then we can actually extrapolate when those kids would be entering kindergarten or they would be entering, different grades. And then on top of that, you can add in, people that don't have any kids that are, empty nesters or whatever that maybe are, going to leave and get replaced with somebody, a younger family with kids, you can add in, number of bedrooms in those houses and things of that nature to kind of make it more accurate analysis on what's the worst case scenario is if every, house without kids with people over a certain age flips us to a house with kids, with one bedroom less than what they currently have or something like that, then that kind of, helps figure it out. But that was just something
Andrew,
that I
let me
had.
just reply to what you said. I want to come back to why you think it's too high, but the projections of the school age population aren't just based on birth rates, which you can tell. I mean, look at the one we're concerned about is fiscal year 21-22, and the superintendent is also concerned. He thinks that is 50 kids too high. We'll know soon. He'll know in April when all the applications are in. But it's also based on not only boomers moving out of their big houses and people with children moving in. There has been an influx out to the suburbs because of COVID. So it's not just birth rates. It is people moving into Southborough from outside that's part of this too. I mean, if you look, it's a huge jump, 168.
Yeah.
I mean, Greg Martineau, I don't know if you know him very well. He's very understated. And I'm telling you, he didn't quite roll his eyes at that number, but pretty close to it. So we'll know soon where they got that number. But interestingly enough, if you go back to the last NASDAQ report that they do every year for the schools, not the one that you pay for, they still had 166 starting in the fall of 21. So that number is being questioned. And we did ask to compare the Southborough. We want to make sure, we don't think they use the Southborough census info, and we definitely want to understand that they didn't. If they didn't, we're going to look at it. So we are going to do what you suggested. But why your first sentence was you think that they're probably conservative or too high. So what makes you think that?
Well, just looking at the fact that we've gone down every year in their projected model since 2010, with the exception of one by 9. And then when you look at their projection, it's going steadily up at a growth rate that's 10, 15 times what the state forecast is. The state's forecast is the disc to go down 3%, but Southborough is going to go up 20 or 30% or 40%. I'm not sure what the number is, but it just doesn't foot. And I understand, and I went through it pretty detailed, and I understand the building permits and that kind of thing. But with the rate of building we had this year, which was something people did because of COVID, it was one of the few industries that could keep going. There's not enough land left to continue that pace for the next 10 years. We would have
Everyone
to
agreed
change.
with that point. We talked about that.
We would have to change our zoning to go from an 1.5 acre lot to 5,000 square foot lots. It's just, there's not that much land left to actually build on, besides some Park Central and some of these
Park
larger.
Central.
Yeah, but even if you add 100 on for Park Central, I just don't see whatever it had. It's another 2,000-3,000 people in this town over the next 10 years. Well, I don't know
Park Central, 100 kids would make a difference here. So you start pushing the high numbers from 2004 if you add 100 kids in there. But anyway, we've got questions.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's the overall population growth is too high. The percentage of people in town that are going to the schools grows too high, and it just seems super aggressive.
But Andrew, you can't take, we think it's too high to the town and say, we spent this money's report, here it is, and we don't believe it. That won't fly. So we've got to get to something that we really can.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to say. Look, we haven't really said, okay, today we have this many school-age children in the town and this many properties, right? These many properties don't have school-age children. Even if, and this is the number of bedrooms, okay, there's 1,000 homes with, the total number of bedrooms is 3,500. Okay, so, even if you flip that over, how many kids on average, houses sold in the last 5 years, what percentage have kids, some actual statistical modeling. I just don't see. I would love to see the model. I don't think the model is, I'm sure they use real data in terms of the number of properties built and things of that nature, and houses sold, but I think it's super they use this year, I guess, which probably is not a great year to use for modeling, and the extrapolation is
So
just
Andrew,
not,
it's new home, it's new house permits. It's not you got your house and start from scratch. It's new home, like a
Yeah.
new subdivision. Like
yeah,
for
but again, they included some of the 55 plus, but then they're saying people backfill, right? And then they're also saying sales, the property sales are very strong this year. But that's, a COVID market. It wasn't as strong last year, of course. I think they're using an outlier year for both construction and for sales to extrapolate out something that's not unrealistic. There's also no margin of error here. What's the margin of error from their model?
You're right.
So I guess, do you have anything else, Andrew, before I go to the next person?
No, I think there's just a couple other little small analysis that they can do to clean it up.
Yeah, so I would say all valid points, and I think Kathy, I don't want to speak for you, but pretty anxious to see what they come back with based on the feedback they've gotten to date. And I know the superintendent was trying to chase them down pretty quickly to get it kind of tidied up, because some of his changes even didn't make it in. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
So
And the only other thing that they had is they relied a lot on the 2010 census, just more from their kind of overall stuff at the beginning on the statistics. I mean, if we're going to start getting 2020 data in a few months, I wonder if they can kind of update.
okay. Joe?
I think like everybody else, I wasn't completely in love with the numbers in the report. And listening to Kathy respond in the meeting about the when we change schools, the numbers that are going to be in each school was concerning. I mean, you're nearly doubling the number in Finn and over in Neary in some ways. Neary a little less, but I was a little concerned about those numbers. I mean, as a parent, I've been in those schools working with librarians and teachers, and the idea that you're going to, nearly double the number in there, and that you're going to be in the same imprint, same footprint, and, there aren't going to be some significant logistical challenges to overcome was something that I was a little concerned about. I think Andrew covered a lot of the things that I felt about the report. I would also say that some of the sales may be misleading. I mean, just in the time that I've lived here, 3 of the parents of the kids that I know just moved within the town, which would artificially inflate some of the sales numbers. And I would be interested in knowing, along with some of the other numbers that were talked about here, how many of those have happened that might inflate the idea that people are moving in the past years. Because some of those are just flipping, the same kids within the town. And I don't know, I'm really skeptical about the influx to the suburbs. I'm sure that it's just a really temporary situation in a lot of ways. So I'm not really keen on basing a lot of our numbers on a potential influx. And we're just one of how many suburbs. So the idea that you're going to get a large run on stock with limited building area, I don't think it's going to be that great. So, but when I stop there and let some other people get some in, because I think Andrew covered a lot of my concerns.
Jeff?
I don't really have much additional to add. I think everyone pretty much covered what I wanted to say. So thank you.
Lisa?
A couple things to kind of piggyback on Andrew. Some of the things that I also had watched it from the school committee meeting. Some things that I found interesting is how the median age in Southborough has gone up to 41.7. I think that was an interesting factor for me. I thought on page 14 of the report, it talked about projections, and interesting how much the growth was in the 55 to 65 plus category. That was one of the largest growing categories, is where some of these school-aged kids had gone down, that had increased. And then Andrew had touched on the projections from 2010 to 20 were actually had gone down, and then from 20 to 30, they actually have them going up. by 231. So those were some of the interesting points that I had taken. And one last piece is talking about the trends of growth from the census. For the last 5 years, their trend has gone up 192 people in 5 years. So, and that was from page 12. So those were just some of my interesting takes, not so much questions, but things I found interesting about the report. So that's it. Thank you.
Kathy, anything to add on the report before we go to next steps?
No, I think we just need to get the questions answered, the errors corrected, and get it back and see what it says again.
Okay. So in terms of next steps, other than what Kathy just mentioned, the school has access to a software that they're using primarily for trying to get more kids back in the school, more days per week. But we are going to be able to actually piggyback that exercise and take some of these numbers and actually see what it would look like. Joe, I think to some of your points of, you're referencing when Kathy was kind of doing some of the numbers on the fly of what Finn would look like, I think was the conversation we were having in the subcommittee. So we're gonna be able to see what it looks like and allow the educators to tell us, yeah, this is a non-starter or this isn't. But I think there's basically 3 scenarios that are in play with, I call it 2 really being the most practical, but 1 we need to be able to answer, with a straight face and have raw data behind it. So that one is to close Neary and to consolidate to Finn in Woodward. That one doesn't present a lot of benefit to the town other than a piece of land and the reduced operational costs, and may put tremendous stress on the system if these numbers are correct. Option 2 is to close Woodward, do something significant in terms of a construction project at Neary, and to maintain Finn but add a grade. And then option 3 is obviously status quo, which would mean to keep all the elementary schools. I'm kind of leaving Trotter off to the side in this discussion because that's really not in play in any of this. And really, you'd still have some significant capital in play at Neary, and you'd obviously have space to accommodate whether these numbers are even off by 100 or 200. Still have more than enough space, but is that the right answer? Because remember, the schools are looking at 2 non-financial factors as part of all this too. Number 1 is campus approach, right? In terms of, you would, if you were to close Neary and keep the other schools, then you basically still have three separate campuses that you're operating. And obviously, if you were to close Woodward, you're basically eliminating a campus that you're maintaining on the school side. And then part 2 is, and by far the more dominant part of the discussion that we've had to date is on transition, right? The educational transition, someone having to transition after grade 1, transfer again 2 years later, and then transfer again 3 years later. 2, 2, 2, 3, right? So, just thinking through what the educational ramifications of that are, and obviously, it's an adjustment for any kid regardless. So that is one of the key objectives we're looking to do. Simultaneously, they are looking for a vendor to perform a facility study on the existing infrastructure, because one of the key things I think we need to know about is how long we have with Neary before we have to start investing in it, right? So there was something on this year's capital plan, and they had approached MSBA about it before we started having these broader conversations. So I think that's going to be a critical component. They have to, because of procurement, they're going to have to go out to bid, at least get some competitive bids. That's the part of the process they're at right now. So we're kind of on pause for a week or 2 until Keith Lavoie at the schools can get a little more familiar with the software, and we can obviously get some of the data updated and kind of then see if any scenario seems to play out well or not. I can't remember whether we've discussed this or not, but the schools are submitting a statement of interest related to Neary construction. You don't specify new, you don't specify addition, you don't specify renovation, you just submit a statement of interest to MSBA. So they are looking to get in the queue. That's going to go in when the cycle opens this year. There's absolutely no binding nature of that. It's really to kind of get in line. There's basically two outcomes from that. They either accept you into the next phase of the process, or they say, come back again next year, right? And there's no telling how long that process takes. So one of the things we will have to look at, in conjunction with that is, what's the cost of wait every year we wait in waiting for MSBA to accept us in, and how valuable is that reimbursement or not, in a much grander financial modeling, given the things that this committee is looking to do, in response to various department head requests. So Kathy, anything to add on next steps?
Yeah, a few things. So Andrew Fab, we'd like to capture the interest rates that are existing today. So that's why the discussion of maybe not waiting for the MSBA grant to be approved might be the way to go. But Jason, a minute ago with the three options, I just finished the minutes for that meeting. And so what I put in the third option was 4 grades in one school, because remember, so Joe, I was surprised.
You're right. We did add that at the very end, right? Option
Because
3A.
Again, Greg Martineau, who I think is a pretty conservative fellow, specifically said that with a overall renovation of Neary, he thinks 4 grades could fit there. So I was surprised about that one too, Joe. But he said it, he absolutely meant it, and he's pretty conservative. So that to me is the third option, with 4, of course, being status quo. So either close Woodward or close Neary, or put all 4 at Neary. You couldn't put all 4 Woodward because we don't have room to expand there.
Well, I think it also, that option makes a lot of sense if we're looking at adding to Neary at any point. Rehab aside, you can rehab the gyms, but the town could really use a big field house anyway, with either indoor AstroTurf and or basketball. Because if you take up those 2 gyms that are over there at Neary in a remodel to house that many more students, there is space there, right adjacent to it, with the parking lot, the playground, whatever, to build something onto that might be a lot more advantageous than having to do a full school fresh build.
Yeah. What I don't think Jason has said yet is that Jason considers Finn and Neary spaces with our flex spaces. We've got room to grow both places, more at Neary than Finn, but there is room to expand a little bit at Finn if we had to do it. So therefore, if we end up with population numbers that we're going to use that look like they're pushing it a little bit, we may have no choice but go the close Woodward and do the Neary Finn route, just to make sure we've got some space to grow if we have to. These numbers are wrong.
And what I mean by Finn, just so everyone's clear, is there's no renovations planned there. But if you were wrong with your projections, and you find that out 5 years from now, you do have a ton of space in the back of the building. You'd be sacrificing probably a baseball field that wouldn't be the one with the lights, but you'd be sacrificing, some flat land, which you obviously could find probably another space for that field if it was really needed. We had a lot of conversation as the committee about, well, how is this any different than what the 2013 committee did, right? And I think the big picture that we all agreed to is Neary, the concept of construction at Neary was never in play back then. It was all, what can we close? I think that was really one of the main questions. So that's really kind of this flex concept that Kathy mentioned.
Jason, can I ask a question?
Go ahead. We'll go reverse alphabetical now.
Okay, just quickly.
We'll start alphabetical. We started reverse last time.
So I don't know if you or Kathy know this. How many rooms currently at Finn are being used and rented, whatever, by Northborough? So if we had to grow, do we have the opportunity, and how many rooms would that potentially be? If we
That's what this analysis is going to do, but it's not insignificant. But the other thing to keep in mind is I think your question actually is a little broader. There's a lot of rooms they use because it's there. But Greg was very clear in our meeting last week. They wouldn't necessarily, if you were starting from scratch, you wouldn't necessarily design that room into the building, right? But they're making use of the space because it's there, and I don't blame them for that. But that would be, where some of the excess is.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, he specifically mentioned Southborough Extended Day that is at Finn. Of course, that's a big room. But of course, it'd have to go someplace if it weren't at Finn. So he did point that one out as far as space that could be reclaimed for classrooms.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think the elephant in the room is something that Jason and other people brought up, which is, what's the cost on the rehab over at Neary? I mean,
Really?
that
And I
number is
agree.
critical.
I agree. Well, remember, we asked Jeff Shaw when he came before us, and we were talking about a number like 40 million to rebuild a whole new school. So it's a big number no matter what we do to it. So you're right, it's a big elephant, Joe.
Lisa, you all set on next steps on that? Jeff? Joe? You're good. Andrew, anything on next steps?
No, I think the only other question was that, Jeff had thrown out the new school. Well, again, what does it cost to renovate Neary versus, build Neary new? Build it on the baseball field and tear down the old one and put a new field in there or something, or put in Joe's turf field for.
Well, yeah, and that's what any next steps would look at, right?
Yeah.
Is if the school committee was amenable to a consolidation, then you would go into what we call feasibility,
Yeah.
right? Which
And then as part of the MSBA process, if we renovated Neary or built a new Neary and it was just a little bit bigger to maybe, allow us that fourth grade if we needed to flex it at some point in time, and then we close Woodward, is that like a no go? We can't expand Neary because we're looking to close Woodward, or if we did it after we started, I don't know.
they're not going to commit until you're in the process. I think that's why it's so hard to
Play the
predict.
webs. Yeah.
But I think the superintendent is being very forthright with what we're discussing as a community, which they do believe, based on the feedback from the third parties, not MSBA, but the third parties, given that Southborough hasn't been, gotten an at bat with MSBA in over 20 years, that factor itself, is very favorable. If they had to do something with Neary.
Okay.
Any other questions on school research in NESDEC? All right. 5, update on fire department tanker request. So we obviously had a very long discussion about this last meeting. Chief Achilles called me probably 2 days after, and he had pulled all of our neighboring communities at that point, as well as, maybe one layer out in some instances about the appetite for kind of a combined sort of capital request, like seeing if there was any sort of funding that anyone else had available. I guess I'm not surprised with the answer. Every town's dealing with the same issues we're all dealing with now in terms of, budgets, both operational and capital, especially when you look around us. All of them are trying. Most of the communities that abut us are actually building new public safety buildings now. At least, either a combined building or their own building. So that kind of obviously exhausts a lot of capital that police and fire otherwise else would be looking for. So they were all very interested in a mutual aid sort of pact, but they weren't necessarily interested, of course, in funding this if we went forward. So my next question to the chief was, okay, fine, let's just say the town wanted to do this now. Is there something in the future that may be on our capital plan that we maybe could give up and rely on that town to, town A, let's just use it, or town B or town C, that town provide that more and more of we call it automatic mutual aid. My burning question was around the ladder, tower, whatever you want to call it, truck, given the size of that and given that every neighboring community has one as well. We both did our research, and what we found is even if you don't have the staff to staff the actual apparatus, having it in the station impacts your ISO rating, which is what we all pay on our house insurance. So if you take that out of the station, it impacts your ISO rating. However, and this was also interesting and somewhat counterintuitive to me, adding the tanker does not help your ISO rating. So it's like complete, I'll call it whips on that. So where we're at is I asked him for an update last Friday on this specific piece. He's obviously still very happy with the support he received. I asked him very specifically, are you applying for the vehicle grant that closes on February 12th? And he said, I intend to, but I may not have time, was the direct response. I went back to him and said, I'm happy to write the grant for him if he wants. I have not heard back again. So I felt the responsibility to bring it back to the committee to discuss what we want to do. Because even though town meeting is delayed, if anyone has any intention of this appearing on the warrant, I think we owe it to Mark and Brian, to make sure they have as a placeholder in the capital section, even though it probably isn't going to have a cost in FY22, given bonding, et cetera. But also, I think, it needs to be presented to advisory, and it needs to be presented to the Board of Selectmen because it wasn't part of our initial, presentation. So that's the update I have. I'm looking for feedback, and I'll just kind of go around the horn of where everyone wants to go with this, given it was a late ask, but there's a lot of support the last meeting. We had a lot of discussion around funding, particularly around Andrew's comments. So, but we do need to kind of call the ball. It doesn't probably have to be tonight, but I think we probably have one more meeting, because if we are going to, unless we decide not to advance it, in which case we have a year. But that's what I'm kind of looking to try to figure out where we're at. So Kathy, I'm going to start with you on this one.
So the grant that he may not have time to apply for is for this truck?
It could be. There's no other, they're not, it's called the Vehicle Acquisition Grant. It's part of the annual AFG grants that are sponsored by FEMA.
But do you have to ask for a specific vehicle, or do you just ask for money for vehicles? Okay, so something's got to go on there, right? So I agree, we definitely need to apply for it. And I just can't believe that there's not enough manpower at the fire station to help him get this grant done without you having to write the grant. So that's just an editorial. Who called the various towns to see if they were interested?
Chief Achilles.
Okay, did he mention what we're talking about money-wise if they were to share? Because when you share it, it's really not a big number.
He didn't, to the best of my knowledge. I think he just was looking to see what towns were looking to do, because remember, there aren't a lot of tankers in this area, other than Hopkinton kind of said we already have one. So this would be like secondary. But in no sense did I get that he had actually referenced, the 30, I have 30,000 in my head based on Brian and your math, like on the fly last meeting. So no, that wasn't discussed. And I'll be very honest, the fire department is very good with mutual aid on emergencies, but this concept of sharing and regionalization just doesn't exist in Massachusetts like it exists everywhere else in the country. Most others do it by county.
So I still support it to be on the plan for fiscal year 22, the current plan. So I haven't changed my mind about that. But I've got to ask the question. This is the type of meeting I wish this wasn't recorded because it's a really stupid question, but I need to know the answer. When you say ladder truck, is the only reason we have a ladder truck is for tall buildings? Is that why you have a ladder truck?
Well, you'd have it for commercial buildings,
Okay.
any two-story house.
Okay, so separate. It's for two-story houses too. We don't have, so it's appropriate. It's not just a, really big tall building. It's for two-story houses too.
Yes, because even though it's got the nice fancy ladder on the exterior, there's a lot of stuff inside, I'll call it the bowels of the truck, that they're carrying, which are ground ladders, versus like a normal pump has maybe one or two ladders.
Okay, that's it for me.
Jeff, you're next in my alphabetical order.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. So kind of share the same thoughts as Kathy. I mean, we wouldn't have brought it up in last week's meeting if we didn't think it was important enough to merit some type of amendment to the articles or to our capital plan. So I think it would be in the town's best interest. And we talked about a lot of reasons why last week that seemed to make a lot of sense to me and to the committee. I speaking on their behalf, but yeah, I think it's worth it.
Joe?
I'm really torn considering that we're going to have to make a lot of hard decisions if we want to keep the tax rate to a reasonable increase this year. And if we're willing to do some bonding of a lot of the equipment and maybe some of the field issues that we have going on for FY22, and we can fit that sort of in the same bucket, and we're going to obviously bond it out for quite a while, then, I think I'm willing to be in on that discussion. Otherwise, if we're gonna really try and pound not to bond some of the stuff that we already have on here, I think it might be better to kick it to next year and then, incorporate it into the more longer term plan of how we're going to deal with everything moving forward.
So let me just clarify a few things, and then Brian, please chime in. One, there's no recreation items that I'm aware of, because you said field items that are hitting the tax rate this year. The only one that I'm aware of is Calander, which is, well, it's raised via tax money. It's a CPA project.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the town voted that down, our tax rate doesn't change. If all else stayed consistent.
Just in the PowerPoint for the FY22, we had the Petrie, the Trotter Track, 9/11 Field, and the golf course, all of which were about 290,000. And those may have already been sunk, but
they're already authorized. We don't have a choice.
Right. But if we can figure out a way to bond those, because those
are bonded, Joe. We're paid. That's a bond payment from something that was done years ago.
Because in the report, I think it says I don't think it says they're bonded.
They say previously authorized, but basically the 3243 that I think you're looking at total. That's that's the sum of bond payments on articles that have already been authorized by town meeting.
Right. I knew they'd been authorized already. I just didn't know if they've been bonded.
They have. And Joe, we've actually asked if there's any refinancing that we can do to take advantage of lower interest rates. The answer has been no. That there's nothing that is callable to 2025. So therefore, the bonds we have are the bonds we have.
So it's nothing we okay.
Not on the prior ones. But
right.
So let's talk about this year, Joe, for a second. So Brian, if the town voted for a tanker, would you bond it?
Yes.
Okay. And you still stand by roughly the bond term that you mentioned at the last meeting based on everything you have at your disposal to date?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
Which would be about 30,000 per year.
Somewhere around.
However,
Yep.
It would not start in FY22 because it would take us a year to actually have to make a payment. So it really it would hit our FY23 tax rate, not our FY22.
Correct.
Okay. And do you have a view one way or another on whether this is an appropriate use of the ambulance fund?
No, I think being past practice and what we've used that before, it's fairly consistent. My opinion.
But again, that's something you don't decide now, right? You wouldn't decide it until you go to bond it. And then obviously if you bond it and there's no money in the ambulance fund, it falls on the general rate. So we present it as general rate for now, and then someone flexes that into the ambulance fund in the future, or you increase the reimbursement from the ambulance fund to the general fund. It's a way to, I'll call it, somewhat neutralize the cost.
Correct. And that's up to town meeting to approve too.
Okay.
Because our plan was already to move up the ambulance 1 year, wasn't it? And do it for FY22.
Yes.
So,
But bond it, not buy it.
right. Yes. No, I understand it's a bond. I'm just looking, I'm just cumulatively putting it together in my head where, what we're bonding, what we're not bonding. And there's still a lot of stuff that we haven't necessarily recommended one way or the other. So a lot of the DPW equipment.
So we don't make a recommendation. We can talk about it, but ultimately it's Brian's call. So the way we presented to the Board of Selectmen was that we had the way the math was working and the way it's working in the tax rate analysis that, Brian and Mark work through every week, is that nothing's getting bonded except for projects that are actually in CPA or an ambulance fund.
Because I recall that, when we were initially talking about being on the committee to the select board, there was an appetite for us to make recommendations as to how to fund things and maybe change the structure in which we fund things moving forward, or how we view funding things moving forward. For instance, if we wanted to create, a set a precedent for bonding equipment, things that we knew that we're really using for multiple years, that there was an appetite for a recommendation that might be a way to adjust the way that we're financing and buying.
So let me ask you this, Joe. Do you have a strong opinion on something that should be bonded that isn't currently listed as bonded right now for next year?
Well,
Assuming we stay with the current slate.
I know Andrew has been talking about leasing for quite a while, and at the rates that we'd be able to bond right now, I mean, it just seemed rather, if we can alleviate the tax rate a little bit, if we can layer, say, vehicles moving forward, it'll catch up to us in a couple of years, but we can alleviate the short-term pressure while we adjust a lot of what we can in terms of our capital scheduling, and we can layer out and maybe gain 2 or 3 years of cutting the curve, and it'll catch up to us if we're not smart about the way that we then move forward in budgeting our capital. But it does alleviate the short term we know a lot of these vehicles are going to be in service for 3 to 5 years at least. Well, it's not necessarily a problem. It's sort of like leasing at this point when we're bonding. If we're bonding a balloon of these vehicles in each year to bond them out 3 to 5 years. And it's the same thing like as if we would be leasing or if we're buying and financing.
Brian, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, no, I think the current slate, I think we brought this up last meeting actually with possibly like the hook truck or the sidewalk project. And maybe bonding those, because bond rates are so good. Quite frankly, the amounts are, they're borderline, 200,000, 150,000. There's a cost of bonding. It just doesn't really seem, definitely not a black and white situation. So.
What would be the cost of floating one bond, for instance? What's the embedded cost, or is it a percentage, or both?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the bond. They're usually $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Yeah, that does make it tough. I mean, like we could easily pull out, $450,000 worth of equipment and trucks out of this, depending if you took the cheapest vehicle and some of the stuff from DPW. I mean, we could get 450, but if we're paying 10% for the bond, that doesn't, that kind of eliminates a lot of that savings.
So let's stick to the tanker. So Joe, is it fair to say you're supportive of the need? You're questioning whether we can afford it next year. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I mean, when we're discussing possible, tax increases of, 8-9% that we're going to have to alleviate, we've got to make the cut somewhere. And what,
So this is an FY23 decision though. Just let's make sure this does not impact your 8 or 9% next year, but it does go to the future management of the tax rate.
Can I ask a question just to interject, and I apologize?
Go ahead.
Brian, $30,000 on our overall levy, what impact would that have at all? I mean, it's going to be a rounding error, right?
Well, 400,000 is about 1%. So 200,000, 0.5%. Yeah, 1/4%. So it's less than that.
Some 0.1%.
I was going to say 0.1. Yeah, just
Right.
rounded.
So it's pretty insignificant. In my opinion, it's pretty significant for the benefits that the town would gain.
So Brian, on a $500,000 bond, what would the cost be? $50K?
Yeah, probably a little under that, Andrew.
Yeah.
Again,
and what would the rate be if we did it over, say, 5 years?
Well, right now the rate's pretty good. Use a 2.5.
Like 1 1/4?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say 2.5, being conservative, but it could be lower than that. Yeah, it could be 2.
I think the real question, again, I don't want to be the lease guy, but at $50,000, I mean, if it's a 2% bond, it might be a 2.5% lease, but it doesn't cost us $50K. But anyway, let's go back to the tanker truck.
So, Joe, are you set with your comments specific to the tanker truck?
I'm more just looking at it in terms of the concepts of how we're going to do all of our purchasing moving forward. And I don't mind purchasing this just outright. I sort of agree with Andrew here, maybe if we could find some way to get a lease deal going that doesn't cost us 10%, that would make a lot of sense too.
Okay. Andrew, do you want to comment on that and then offer your comments specific to the tanker?
I think if we can bond some of the stuff or to lease it, then that certainly frees up next year's tax rate. One question, Jason, for the AFG vehicle grant, a town of our size, what would the match be? Is it 5%?
Should be 5.
5? Okay. So what's that, 20K if we bought the truck? So, I mean, I would be in favor of putting in a 20K match into the budget for next year. I actually think we should have either as capital's control or advisory's control a grant matching pool. For may say 50K and 20 of it could cover this if the grant gets approved, and then if it doesn't get approved, it would be a FY23 project.
So I guess my thought is not opposed to the concept, right? Because we did this kind of with the SCBA, but I think we need to look at the timing too, right? Like, let's just say we are successful in the grant. I don't actually think you have an expense in FY22 for the 20,000 match, because you're not going to be able to, the chief can't order until he has funding, right? So by the time it's like a year, he said, roughly, even if he gets like one that's on a lot, so to say, by the time they get it, ready to go in service. So while I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that, I don't think it's necessary because of the timing of how long. This is an exception, right? Because of how long it takes to procure this thing. But are you saying that if we don't get a grant, you're not in favor of buying it outright and bonding it for the 30,000 in FY23? Is that what you're saying?
For FY22 appropriation, which would hit the tax bill in FY23, I am not in favor of spending $400,000. I'm in favor of spending 150 on a used one, but not 400,000 for a brand new. I think if we need a brand new, let's set aside 20K for a grant match, apply in February, and fingers crossed we get it. And 20K out the door, great. If not, reevaluate, see whether or not we can find a used one that's any good, or see if the taxes look better next year, and a $400,000 expenditure can be absorbed, even if bonded. I think we're kicking the can down the road by approving it now, but knowing it won't hit us till next year. We don't know yet what next year is going to look like.
Lisa?
So, Jason, if we apply for the grant, what is the time frame? And I apologize if you already answered
By
this.
June-ish.
By June-ish. So if we potentially put this on the warrant for this year, and I'm not against doing that, and we find out in June, I mean, we may be looking at a June town meeting. This may be an article that ends up getting pulled anyway from town meeting, potentially, fingers crossed. Based on the conversations we've had at this point, I am fine with putting it into our capital plan for 22. But honestly, I think at some point we're going to be going back to the capital plan anyway and rediscussing all the items in there. So I'm in favor of putting this in there now. And if it survives, our next pass, which I'm sure that we're going to have to do. I mean, I don't know how else we're not going to do that, but I'm certainly in favor of putting it in here for 22 now, and having a broader discussion when we kind of have a little better outlook of what we could or couldn't do. So
Yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty much next on the agenda is prioritization. So I think what I kind of need from, I guess where I'm struggling with that comment, Lisa, just a little bit is, even if we look at FY22 and we pare it down, right, and we get the rate to wherever we want, who is tracking where the town is headed for the next 5 years, right? Like, I know Brian has at times had like a 5-year levy capacity sheet, et cetera. But I haven't seen that in a while. So if I followed your logic, I don't know how I vote yes or no on this for FY22 if I don't know where this is going, sort of thing. So, because it's really not FY22 expense, it's just an appropriation, as Andrew said. So that's kind of where I'm struggling with trying to figure out, like, as we go through all the other items, those are real costs in FY22.
Right.
Versus this one is not a cost for 22, it's a cost for 23 and beyond, in question whether it's a cost for the general fund, ambulance, or some split.
All right, how about this for an answer? I haven't changed my opinion from when we discussed this prior, as far
Okay.
as when to put it on. How's that?
All right.
Okay.
Okay. So unless someone has a great desire to make any updated motion on this from last meeting, I'm going to keep going on the agenda, because I think this comes into, now it's part of our discussion as part of FY22 capital items. Does that make sense? Before I leave it, obviously it doesn't seem like anyone's going to balk if we get a $400,000 grant and have a 20K match, right? I didn't hear any objection to that, right? I got to be honest, we're all relying that this is actually going to get filed, right? Like, go back to my opening. So that's the big assumption. So any messaging anyone wants me to take back to the chief other than what I've already delivered?
I think if you said it, you'll do it, and it still doesn't submit it, then that's the issue.
So can I ask Mark a question?
Yes, go ahead.
So, Mark, I didn't watch the meeting, but it's my understanding that Sam finally got everybody to agree to hire a grant writer. Is that true?
Sam got Marty to agree that we should try to find the money to do that. They wanted to try to find 25 to 30 grand in this budget to do that for a beta test for the remainder of the fiscal year. I've talked with Brian about this, and Brian can weigh in if he'd like, but I told Marty that I don't know where we're going to pull 25 or 30 grand from right now that we may not need between now and the end of the year. So,
All right. So in other words, we don't, I was hoping you were going to say, yeah, I found it and that person's hired, but that's not true. It's not going to happen before February 12th. It doesn't sound like. So that's not going to help Chief Achilles get this grant.
I'll add, even if they did have the budget, a grant writer is such a broad topic. You need someone that has experience writing grants for FEMA, because you have to basically go to the FEMA regional contacts, have a conversation, describe your need, and they actually do evaluations with you along the way, which increases your chances of success. If you just found someone that's a general municipal grant writer, they may not specialize in the public safety. You'd like almost looking for a subset specialty of a specialty. But all right, anything else on the tanker?
No, Jason, if I could just add on your message to take back to the chief, that I
Yes.
think it would be highly recommended that they find a way, whether it's through you or through somebody else, to, I would expect that this grant would be applied for.
Okay. The good news on grants for the fire department is I know the chief updated on a grant he submitted to the state. They did also submit to the federal government a grant for power rescue tools, which are basically jaws of life. It's the easier way of putting it, that are outdated, that have a high chance of approval based on the criteria. That's part of the same program as the vehicle. You can actually go for one vehicle, one piece. And that came out of some conversations he and I were having. That's what they used to have as the placeholder for SCBA, which we don't qualify for. So we could apply, but we're not going to get it because we're not old enough on that. So if awarded, again, we know that by June, it's like $1,000 or $2,000 match, so they're not going to be coming to us looking for that. But the important thing is it also would remove a capital item in the near future of somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. So about 2 or 3 years out. So we can start getting ahead on some of these things. I think that would also be, instead of we're chasing our tails a little bit right now. So with that, I'm going to go to approval of fire department changes to capital plan. So the reason what I just said is really important is he went for a Jaws of Life Power Rescue Tool grant. He did not go for an SCBA grant. In our FY22 capital plan, we have an SCBA grant match. The chief is okay if we remove it, but I need a vote of this committee. Before we move on that, there's also one other update that I'd like everyone to consider. Because of the age of the SCBAs, he's also recommending that we push out to FY25, currently FY23, the $250K plus SCBA expense, because of when these things actually need to be replaced. It's unclear to me why we're just figuring this part out now, but I think the point is they've now lined up the equipment with when it's supposed to be replaced and when it hits its NFPA kind of requirement to be replaced, and trying to line it up with the right grant cycle. So, are there any questions on that before I move on that? So basically, we're removing let me get the precise amount. We're removing a $13,000 grant match from the FY22 capital plan, and we are approving pushing out the SCBAs from FY23 to FY25, which is over $250,000. So again, that will help us as we start to get into next year as well. Any questions on that? All right, then I'm going to move that we accept Chief Achilles' recommendation to remove the $13,000 SCBA grant match from the FY22 capital plan and to defer the SCBA replacement from FY23 to FY25. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Pfaff,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. All right. So that's unanimous. We are going to go to FY22 capital items, discussion of prioritization and steps before a town meeting. We have time, but we don't have a lot of time. So, I think it's definitely been, we had a recommendation, which was based on pure needs. Now we got to fit that needs into a budget. Remember, the Board of Selectmen have held harmless, as we've been calling it, the capital budget to date. Advisor has not considered it. We'll get to that when we get to one of the future items. But I think we'd all be naive to think that this current slate is going to survive if the 8 to 9% range still exists out there. And obviously, we're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle this year because of the lack of a fall town meeting in the light of a full slate for FY21. But, it's the world we're living in, right? And there's nothing that could have been done about it. So what I want to do is bring you up to speed on one item. And then what I want to understand, and we'll just do around the horn, and believe Jeff, you'll be up first, just forewarning, with any items that anyone would consider revisiting. Just the item and why you want to consider revisiting it. I'm just going to start with an update on the servers, the $90,000 expense that had been in here. As all you remember, Mr. Butler had sent us a note in and around November timeframe, I believe. It was sent to us, it was sent to advisory, it was sent to Board of Selectmen, and I believe MTC as well, and maybe some other interested parties. I didn't go back and look at all the names on it. And I kind of just left it off to the side, knowing that Tom was leaving at that point, and knowing that we'd have a new IT director. Well, we don't have a new IT director still. So I reached out to Matt Probst, the chair of MTC, to just kind of see where they stood. And he wrote back that they currently, while they haven't taken a vote, do not support that capital item. Which was interesting because Tom had reviewed it with them before bringing it to us. So he agreed. They have a public meeting tomorrow night. He agreed to come back to us with more details. So I know others have raised that in light of Mr. email. I would just say, let's put that on the, I'll call it question mark list for now. Let's hope that we have an IT director soon that can weigh in on the need, and that MTC, given their expertise, can provide, a full opinion or join us at a future meeting to articulate why that's the right or wrong answer. I don't know, right? But I think it would just be conjecture amongst all of us right now without having those parties weigh in. So I think we need to keep it as a question mark until we hear more about it, because I don't know that we're in a spot to, do anything more with that. Is there any questions specific to that?
Mark, could we use CARES for that? I think some towns have used CARES for infrastructure or server upgrades just because more people are working from home. I don't know if we've asked or not.
I mean, I'm not sure that it really falls into the COVID category.
I don't either. Andrew, what we also heard is, Westboro, everybody got a laptop because they had to work at home. So they got new laptops because of that. I haven't heard about servers going in for CARES reimbursement.
Thought I saw something. If I could find it, I'll send it.
All right. With that update, Jeff, anything else that you would like to revisit that was in the plan to Board of Selectmen?
Yep. So that was on my list for sure. The upgrade on the server. The only other things I could think of: the library, the interior renovations. No one's using the library. I don't know when they're going to be using that anytime soon. Although I fully recognize the convenience of doing that work as soon as possible since no one's in there. But if we're going to make some difficult decisions, that might be one of them. And I hate to say it, but go back to the chief vehicle as well. And if that's something that we'll need to reconsider, again, I was in favor of it, but if we're trying to parse through what is the most important across all the needs, then that's something I guess I would want to revisit as well. And then maybe finally, again, I'm kind of going all over the place here, but any of the chippers or anything like that, the hook lift truck from DPW, how much more time we could possibly get from our current fleet if we can push that off of the year if we're thinking about any tough decisions.
Okay. Joe.
I sort of said pretty much what I had to say earlier. I think we should be restructuring the way that we're doing it, rather more than trying to prioritize at this point.
So I need some help there because I don't understand.
Well, we're talking about buying most of the stuff we're talking about buying outright, although we're talking about bonding some of things. And I would rather see more of the vehicles all just tied together and we go into a financing mode with the whole fleet, as opposed to, buying some things outright, bonding some other things, consider them all equipment assets over X years, prorate what we're doing to, adequately account for the number of years for these vehicles, but do bonding packages where we just bond all vehicles at once. It sort of goes in line with the idea of financing or leasing, where we're really just taking it all and accounting for it over the years that we're going to use it. And then, so we're paying, we're paying on the go as we go, as opposed to buying everything up front.
Okay. Andrew?
Let's see. Sidewalk maintenance. I think we could probably remove that this year. There is still some money, I think, in the sidewalk maintenance fund. One of the old articles, Brian. I think there's still some left in there that maybe we can.
How much?
It was like 50K. Well, and then this is something else I had talked to Karen about. So I think there's road sidewalk improvement article, I don't know, from a long time ago, 48K in there.
Are you
and then
sure?
there's some-
Because that's news to me. Is that right, Brian? We've got $50,000 in an ode article for sidewalks?
Could be. I know she's been reviewing them lately. I haven't
And I
looked
got
at
it
the
from
list.
Carla, so I'm assuming it's good. But if it is, but there's still some money left over in the DPW radio fund. So one thought was to use some of that if we could for Chief Achilles. And then that's about 58,000 left in that, and then move that 50 into another sidewalk article. So basically reduce it from close this one out, move 8 into paying for those antennas if it's close enough to the article, and then close it out and change the sidewalk to 50 thou. So we'd have about 100 thou. If you followed that.
I followed it, but I don't know that you can move what you want to move from one article to the other. I don't think they're that close.
No,
But
I'm saying close it out.
we've been very aggressive sometimes as far as using warrant articles to do things they weren't intended to. But closing it out is not going to change anything. Closing out just means it goes into free cash for
Correct.
2 years from now. So it's not going to help us in fiscal year 22 to close out a warrant article. But if we've got $50,000 in the sidewalk fund already in a sidewalk fund from an old article, which I don't remember that being there, and we go through these every year, but if she says it's there, I'm sure it's there, then that's good news.
But yeah, so I think that's one that we could probably push off. The server one. And then the only other one, Jason, for the 2 police cruisers, do you know which vehicles those were to replace?
One is the old chief's vehicle, which is the detective's car.
Okay.
And I don't remember the second one. I can ask Chief Paulus.
I was assuming it was the Taurus Patrol with like 95,000 miles on it. That would make sense. Because the detectives has 121. Could one thought was to do one vehicle, so we have a new patrol vehicle, and the chief's vehicle, which has 90,000, will go to reserve detail. Maybe that can go to the detective, or if
That is where it's going.
okay, it said reserve detail. But if it goes to the detective, then we don't need a new detective vehicle, right?
I'd have to confirm with Chief Paulus, but his vehicle, the one he hasn't even gotten his new vehicle, by the way, right? Like that's how long these, like even a simple car with an unmarked, that's how long these things take, through the state procurement. But his car either goes to reserve or it goes to detective based on where they're at in the cycle. And there's some sort of rotation too that I think they entail.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's even more complicated with COVID because you can only have so many people in the same car and sharing and all that fun.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, I think the patrol car that's got 95,000 as of August, so it's probably way over 100 now. That should be replaced. But I'm wondering the second one, whether or not we could push that off a year, and maybe we can use the fire chief vehicle as a detective vehicle or a traffic vehicle or something. I don't know if we could do something like that to be creative, but that was just one I thought, moving one of the police cruisers to 23.
Andrew, how many miles did you say the second one had on it?
So the oldest patrol vehicle, which I'm assuming you replaced with the brand new, has 95,000 miles as of August 31st.
Okay, what about the other one?
The other one, the detective one, has 121,000, but I think the chief's old vehicle with 90,000 is supposed to go there. Then there's a traffic one, administrative one with 95,000, and a couple detail vehicles with like 105,000. So
And
I
those
thought-
numbers were as of the fall, though, right? I think that's the
August
last time we got
31st.
mileage.
Yeah, August 31st. So I'm just wondering if we can add another older vehicle, i.e. the fire chief's old vehicle, to use for detective or detail or admin vehicle. This is an admin one there too. And we could buy ourselves another year. I don't know, just trying to be creative.
Jason, can I ask a question on that?
Go ahead. Lisa.
So And again, I don't know if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but I know that there's been discussions about the facilities vehicle as well, kind of getting to the end of its life. Didn't we have discussions on one of these vehicles potentially being transferred over to facilities if need be, based on the number of dollars we're putting into the current vehicle that's there and the shape that it's in? So,
So we did not take, so we talked about it high level, but fell short of any sort of recommendation. But I think that's relevant based on what Andrew's now proposing.
okay.
The discussion came up, if I recall, in light of the Chiefs vehicle and the fact that we were going to have an
Yes.
Explorer
Yeah.
with approximately 70,000 miles on it in perfect shape, essentially. Let me just react. So, Andrew, I like the line of thinking around what to do with the Chiefs vehicle. If we still, I know Jeff raised that he may not support, right? It's just one option that, like, let's just assume new fire chief's vehicle gets passed at town meeting and that vehicle becomes available. They marked that car up pretty well when Chief Morrow left. So it used to be an unmarked fire chief's vehicle. You can now see it coming every ways. Like, I mean, the amount of lettering on that vehicle, I do not know anything about vehicles in terms of like what it takes to peel it off, but I can't imagine that paint color is going to be the same color.
Jason, can I interrupt? Because I saw that car the other day and I talked to the person who drives it, whose name I can't remember.
Lieutenant Deneau, probably.
Yeah, and he said it was going to go to facilities. So I'm just going to throw that in. He said that car was going to go to facilities.
Mark, do you know about some deal that we weren't made aware of? I think we all agree Mr. Parent needs a new car, but I don't know that.
Yeah, there's no deal. I mean, I think it makes sense, John, that car is getting old. That car is, going to become, unreliable. And if you've got a Chiefs vehicle that's that we're transferring that's got fairly low miles for what John is using it for, it only makes sense, I think, to get rid of something that old and replace it with something new to him.
Play this out though, right? I'm somewhat contradicting myself, but just follow. I like Andrew's idea, but I don't like the idea of the fire chief's vehicle to get that working, because it's now fire prevention, shall we say? Because it's not the chief doesn't drive around it anymore. We're gonna have to basically unmark it to give it to facilities, versus, right, taking fire chief's vehicle potentially goes to police. You're gonna have to change red lights, blue lights. You can't like keep the same light package, but it's already wired, right? So you're talking about different radio system, etc. I don't know if they would put a key like all the police accessories or not, but it's something worth exploring, because you remember that I believe it was the Taurus sedan that's unmarked. That might be like, I don't know that that's a fully equipped car. It has obviously lights and stuff, but like that would be easier to replicate into facilities. So Mark, if we went down this road, do you think it's just a meeting of the minds of the two chiefs and the facilities director, or just the two chiefs and yourself to figure out like how best to accommodate everyone's needs in a tight budget year?
I could sit down. I think I would sit down with the chiefs and try to figure out what makes sense on that side, and then see what's available for, would be available for facilities. But again, if we're going to replace facilities vehicle with, a hand-me-down that doesn't get much better than what he's got, then I don't know there's a value in that. So yeah, I'm happy to have the conversation and see what makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, mileage only tells one story, right? You don't know what sort of damage any of these vehicles have taken over time. I can probably assure you Chief Morrow's car is probably in the best shape, because that was his commuting car more than anything else.
There's a couple of deer that probably would beg to differ, but
Fair enough.
Yes.
So is anyone opposed to Andrew's idea in us trying to work through that?
Yeah,
All right, Andrew, what else you got?
So my basically just to elaborate on that. So the one point I had is that there's really 5 patrol vehicles, and it's one's kind of, it doesn't have mileage here, but it's a 2018, so it's probably got 25,000 miles. 2019 was 16,000, a 2017 with 53,000, and a 2019 with 17,000. So the oldest one is a sedan with 95, which I agree needs to be replaced. So the question is basically, you have one, that you're going to replace with 95,000, and the next one down's got 54,000. Can we squeeze out another year or two? With a patrol vehicle. I mean, even if we had to replace a detective vehicle or a detail vehicle with something without lights and all the stuff, I don't know if that's cheaper or whatever, but
It's not a detail vehicle anymore.
But yeah, or whether or not to your point, the fire one with replacing the lights is a better, than one of the other older detail vehicles. But
Okay.
just a thought. I think that's all I had for capital.
Okay. Lisa.
All right, I'll just reiterate, I think we need to keep the facilities vehicle in mind as we move forward and make some decisions. As far as what to possibly look at again, I don't know how much my mind will change, honestly. I mean, we went through this list pretty extensively, but I think Jeff brought up some things worthy of a discussion, I guess, if push comes to shove. I hate to say the library again, because that item has been, Mark, how many years has that been on here to do? I mean, as long as I've been on the board, it's been on here and we've kicked this can.
At least 3.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
library. Well, the problem is library came with a lot of requests, and they've had a lot of things deferred, and then we've just
Yeah.
added things in as we've had to. But we've tried to catch up with them as best we can. But yeah, they've got a lot of needs in that building.
yeah, no, and I agree that, no one's in the building now. Nobody's been in the building for a while either. Hopefully by some time in the fall, we'll be able to open up again. But that might be something to consider. I don't know where I stand on the chief's vehicle. And then, that's really it for me. I mean, I think we had some really hard and tough discussions on some of these. I mean, if I look at dollar figures, I could say the hook truck, but we had a pretty lengthy discussion on why, again, that one's been kicked down the road and what another year would entail. So I'm probably no help, but that's my thoughts.
All right. Kathy.
All right, so I've whacked it pretty good here. I've done a lot more than just cap. So I've gone through an exercise of seeing what it would take to get us down to a year-over-year tax increase that has a 3 as the first number. So I've done a lot of things. This is just one of them. So here I go. I started with what I consider the 2 untouchable things on our list. I've got the list in front of me, and those would be road maintenance and the facilities, $100,000. So to me, those are 2 starting points. They have to stay. We have to have money in to do roads, and John Perrin has to have money to fix buildings with unexpected things that go wrong. From that point on, I hear what Jeff is saying too, but I agree the library's been kicked down so much. I don't see how we say no to that this year. So I think that's my next untouchable one. I also think the poor townhouse, with as little as we spend on the senior center, that's the least we can do. So I consider that 3 and 4 untouchable. From that point on, I don't have anything that's untouchable. So here I go with what to do and still get the stuff. I think the sidewalk should be taken out completely. And it makes me feel better when Andrew tells me we got $50,000 in an owed warrant article for sidewalks. I believe the servers should be taken out for the reason that John Butler has stated, so that we really need to get on the cloud and shouldn't be replacing servers. And when we need servers, we should push things to the cloud. So I took that out completely. Then I took out, let's see, the hook lift truck. I'm hoping that we can push more. I'm still saying yes, because this is the kind of thing that has gotten pushed too, and she probably does really, really need it. But I would hope that the water fund could pay for more than it's supposed to pay for right now. So that's a question for Karen as far as how she came up with what looks like a fairly arbitrary split between the two. So I basically said half of it stays general and half of it goes to water in my exercise here. Then items 16 through 21, and then item 23, which are the various vehicles and the various equipment for fire and police, mostly fire, and 24. I didn't take them out, but I would like, and Lisa, I'll look at you, see them funded in a different way. So what I'd like to see first is the money that comes in every year from the Harvard bookstore, which is dedicated to police and fire. It's restricted. I would like to see those funds used and budgeted. We know what they are against this first. And then Lisa, I'd like to see an effort to finance the rest of it outside the general fund. And there's a couple ways to do that that are beyond the scope of our committee. So when I do all that, just so you know, I get a new number from the general fund of 884, which I think is much more in line with what we're going to be able to put into this budget when everything is said and done.
Any questions for Kathy?
Kathy, can you send me that?
Yep.
Thank you.
I would just, Kathy, on top of that, I think there's also the police and fire Main Street Bank donation. There's still some funds from that.
So I don't even know what that is. So
I think it was Main Street Bank gave 10,000.
Middlesex, right? I think it's Middlesex.
Middlesex Savings Bank, right. Gave 10,000 to the police and 10,000 to the fire last year.
If I'd like to, I have a question, because we're talking about that hook and ladder truck again, and my understanding was that they retired the last one, or this year they were taking it off the road and said they wouldn't plow with it. Is that correct?
They did. The last snowstorm, that truck did not go out.
Yeah. So I mean, we're down a plow truck without it, which I don't know what the safety concern in that is, or how desperate we actually need that. And I defer to somebody else that knows better.
I mean, if you look back to the conversation this same group had, right, our committee hasn't changed. We thought it should have been brought to an fall 2020 town meeting, and we were pretty unanimous behind it. I have no objection to Kathy's comment about, is there a different split that could be looked at? But I think there's another hook lift coming next year or the year after. Like these things, there's a few of them. It's not just like the town has one, but yeah. So anyone have any other questions for Kathy? I'm just going to run through mine, which are somewhat similar to most everyone's. I think the hook lift is untouchable, given the prior conversations. I think if we have to think about a creative way to pay for it, let's talk about it. But I think there are options. Options within. There's 2 trucks that they're looking at in DPW. Whether one, you could get by with 1 versus 2. I'm not in favor of kicking the library down the road anymore. I think it's pretty clear we're going to have that building for a while, given the work that's going on there. If we were in a different state with the building project, there, I would think maybe differently. On the fire and police side, while I think Kathy's recommendation would be awesome if it happens, I'm a little pessimistic. So what I would say is I'm willing to discuss the chief's vehicle, but only but I think the discussion should be around whether that should be the tanker instead, in terms of what you think about the benefit to 10,000 residents. So I would think about that. And I would also, the other untouchables I see on fire, if we can't get funding for them, are the SCBA cylinders. Like that's just a requirement. Like we have to provide the cylinders and the IV pumps and the turnout gear. Like there's nothing we can do about that. On the IT, I share the reservations about cloud versus servers. However, I think we really need to look at that one hard from a public safety perspective. Public safety is not in the cloud for a reason, due to redundancies, et cetera. So cloud, we just need to think about whether there's one size fits all, and would also encourage a dialogue with the schools, because I don't think everyone should have, I think there is probably some synergies, and I know Mark has tried to make progress, on that position in general, obviously given the sharing that's existing now. And then what I would say is there's a decent amount of Harvard funds left this year. I know some has been appropriated, Mark, to the radio maintenance contract. Is that correct? Why we can't buy some of these defibrillators now? It's clearly a need. I think we all agreed to the need. But why we can't try to, you're going to get the same model in June versus July, depending on where you spend it. So if we can, it's small in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's little things like that will help. So I'm echoing a lot of what people have already said, but I think there's clear track. I guess, let me take a stab at summarizing the items that, I'm not going to hit every one, but the ones I heard the most discussion around is sidewalks. So let's start there. So we had a lot of discussion about that in terms of what residents wanted. I guess, Andrew, if there really is 50,000, I think we should start there. But I think given what you're doing with Karen more broadly from an operational perspective, like, is there a one-time sidewalk project? I'm not saying this is an FY22 item, but like, instead of funding it for, I'll call it patching, right? Is there a comprehensive list that if she could go out to bid once and kind of get things in order, like on existing sidewalks, which is what we're talking about, like that might be a nice middle ground that you solve your 22 tax rate, but you still keep this need top of mind?
So the sidewalk is the complete streets project prioritization plan, I guess. So they're developing the plan, but I don't think that includes, say, what the, I don't know if that'll have like the full cost, right? So I think once they finish that complete streets prioritization plan, then there's probably a better sense of what that
Is that for new sidewalk or existing?
that is was the base, the old sidewalk committee, right? That project became the basis of the complete streets project prioritization plan, so which is underway.
Okay, so if Karen, my understanding was when we talked to Karen at length about this, the 200,000 was to basically fix existing sidewalk. Does anyone have a different recollection of that? So,
Yeah,
so I
it was
think,
not for new sidewalks.
okay. So can you ask Karen for a rough estimate of what it would take to kind of get what we have for sidewalks up to par, like the stuff that really needs to be repaired soon? Like, is that 50,000? Is that 200,000? Or is that $1 million? And we were just going to pick away at it, because I'm also in favor of going for bidding once and not 4 times.
I think this is a drop in the bucket of which would be millions of dollars.
So can we try? Do you want to take ownership? Or do you want someone else to try to take ownership of figuring out what that total
I
is?
talked to her about this one as one that I think, I would recommend removing, and she kind of said, well, I think that she wasn't surprised that I said that.
But was she opposed to you saying that?
She didn't want to get rid of it, but I said, I personally think it's probably something that with this tax situation we have, we might want to look at removing it.
But leave that off to the side for a second, Andrew. If we don't understand what the total need is, just throwing, like, I get why we do road maintenance the way we do it, but if there's like a one-time thing, and maybe it's not FY22, but if there's a one-time thing, I'd like to know what the total cost is as opposed to 200, 200, 200. I agree, this may not be the year, but I don't want to just dispense of it because we have a budget problem.
Yeah, but we also still have 600K in our road maintenance.
Which can't be used for sidewalks, is my understanding, based on how the language was written in the warrant. Mark, is that correct?
For an existing road?
But we don't want to use it for sidewalks. It is for roads, and it's done with the formula, so we don't want to start dipping into that for sidewalks, because then the roads are going to be short.
All right, So let me clarify the question. So you really want to know, what do we need to do immediately for sidewalk repair, or what is it going to be to do all of the sidewalks that people want in town?
What I personally want, and I'm open to anyone else adding on to this, is the sidewalks we have in now that are in dire need of maintenance in the next 2 to 3 years. What is the cost of that?
Okay.
And then see what comes back and go from there.
All right.
Does anyone else have another approach they want to take on that?
Let me just confirm, Andrew, I didn't doubt you, but there is $48,000 in a warrant article called roadside walk improvements. So that's good. She can use that. But, we don't have that many sidewalks in this town. We need more, but we don't have that many. Once we get the downtown are taken care of now. So I don't know that it's millions to fix the sidewalks. So it would be interesting to see what a real plan looks like to fix what we have, separated from what we want to add.
Well, if my memory serves me correct, part of the debate that we had in one meeting was the fact that it's easier to do these sidewalks when you're doing the roads. And is that only new sidewalks, or is that the rehab of the old ones as well?
I would think the paving trucks out there at any point in time is cheaper. But
Well, I thought there was also something, like in some cases there might be a little structural need. I mean, put it this way, on Parkerville down near Finn, I mean, there's a part that's just been falling apart. It's maybe not a huge section, but maybe like 30, 40 feet that's just falling apart. And I don't know if they would have to redo the bed when they did that. Those sorts of issues that go along with it, and whether that's easier to do when you're redoing the street, or as opposed to trying to dig up the side of the road and maybe compromising the road bed while you're doing it, so there may be complications, that sort of thing. Just a thought. That's all.
Mark, or wasn't there one for Needham Street that we were going to do a proposal for?
Newton.
Wasn't there a grant application we had for that or something? It was like $300K. Newton Street, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But that's for new.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying in terms of costs.
Andrew, when Karen was in, I know we had talked about fixing the sidewalks from where the downtown heading down towards Woodward, they stopped at one point. And I thought Karen said that was on the deck for fiscal year 22. I could be completely off base. Maybe it's 21 and I'm wrong. Can you just check and make sure that part of that wasn't, the 200,000 wasn't allocated in her mind towards that portion of sidewalk? Because I know, again, you have beautiful sidewalks to just before the senior center, and then they're crumbling and they're pretty bad. So if you could just follow up with her and make sure that part of this 200,000, because I would have a concern about taking it out if that was part of the case, because that's used a lot. And you walk to a certain point and it's not so great.
Okay,
So
so
if you
you
could
basically want to clear just to clarify, basically from the senior center to downtown, that sidewalk, was that included in the 200K?
Yeah, so basically from in front of Woodward, it's actually
Okay.
where the crosswalk is, where they stopped when they were doing the downtown. And then it just went back to pitted and I know that there was talk of going down past the cemetery or down to the cemetery. So I just want to make sure when that is going to take place, if it was in 21 or 22.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so we have our homework on sidewalks. Is there any homework anyone else wants to propose other than sidewalks? I'm going to look into the police, fire, repositioning chiefs' vehicles and stuff with that, the chiefs. And then Mark, I think you're best suited to have a discussion about Harvard funds. And I'm happy to weigh in at any point, but I'm talking about this year, but also we know there's some coming for next year, and whether, maybe one of the projects that they had on their side list, so to say, just needs to wait if these capital items are. I think it would be a test to how valid and important these capital items are.
Sure.
And the Main Street Bank or Middlesex Bank donation in that pool too.
Okay. Is there anything else anyone wants any homework done on, or we know what we need to do? It's just a matter of how much we can actually afford.
You were going to check on the police too, right?
Yeah, I think police, fire, that whole is all intertwined, right? Which then leads to Lisa in the facilities vehicle.
And then you mentioned something about the DPW pickups, right? There's for the bodies or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's 35 a piece.
That you want me to bring that up with Karen?
If you're already talking to Karen, it can't hurt.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you'll take, I guess, Mark, Brian, who's Kathy's question on the hook lift for in terms of the right how to do the right allocation without getting in trouble?
Mark's not volunteering, I'll volunteer. I got it.
All right. So I think if everyone brings their homework back to the next meeting, I think what we can either do is take an official position on whether there's anything anyone wants to remove, or, you know, we may have split decisions at that point too, and go from there. And hopefully just another 2 weeks helps get us a little further in the budget cycle in terms of, are we still at 8 or 9%? Because I think that's the troublesome piece that everyone keeps coming back to. Anything else on FY22 capital items? All right. Lisa, I should have given you a heads up on the next one. It's item 8, standing committee language for town meeting warrant. Does the Board of Selectmen still intend to sponsor this article at town meeting? I know you haven't taken a position, but there's been no discussion to the contrary, correct?
No, there hasn't been.
Okay. So there's going to have to be language for those of you that haven't been through this before that goes into the ultimate warrant. And I'm sure Mark would like to check this box off sooner rather than later. I think the important update is that advisory has already voted on the language that they're going to be looking for a change in the warrant for this year, which does include consideration of some of the issues we've talked about in terms of cross-committee membership for at least the three of us that kind of sit on both committees at this point. So there's no waiting on advisory at this point. I think the language that capital planning comes up with is kind of, we're on our own. And I think advisory has done what they need to do to ensure that there can be a representative from capital on advisory in the future. But I think we didn't take a formal position, Kathy, right? But I think the general consensus was we're going to pare back the number, although it's not specifically called out in any charge or recommended language for the warrant.
We're not going to officially put that in the bylaw change that we're recommending. You're right. We're going to leave that to the committee to do the wise thing when the advisory committee votes to approve someone on. We know now we're never going to put 3 on one committee again. That's what we think. So as long as our successors think that too, then that won't happen again. But we're leaving it to the wisdom of the advisory to figure out who should be on a committee, another committee.
So the question really comes down to is, Mark, are you going to write the language? Is someone on your team going to write the language? Or are you looking for a volunteer from this committee to propose it?
I'll take door number 3.
So if there's someone that has a wedded interest in that door number 3.
I thought you just volunteered, Jason. Did I not hear you?
I volunteered?
I thought that's what you just said when you
Okay.
asked Mark. I thought you were door number 3.
Ah, yes. Well, I do think it's, it should be the sponsoring board. I don't know if anyone has any views about that. All right, let me ask it this way.
Jason, right?
What'd you say?
You know what flows downhill, right?
Yeah. So let me ask it this way. What I'm going to do for the next meeting then, as part of door number 3's operation, is I'm literally going to take the charge that the Board of Selectmen have for us. I'm going to figure out a way to put that into standing committee language form. But if anyone has strong views about the existing charge, you should bring them to the next meeting or be prepared to talk about them, because that's essentially, I think, what the document's going to start to look like. Mark, obviously, I will take you up on your gracious offer to help. I thought I heard something along those lines.
Door number 2.5.
Like to just, because I'm not going to go back and look at how EDC did theirs and any of these other standing committees that have been stood up. Like if there is a proper format to put it in, et cetera, I realize our full charge won't get in there, but if there's a proper way to do it. And then I guess to our researcher, I don't know if you saw any standing committee language in other town codes, but if you have any of those, if you could flip them to me, I think that would be a way to accomplish this in a teamwork fashion,
I'll send you some
especially if I
tips.
end up with a fire grant to
I
write.
say, why don't you just tack that onto your
Yeah.
grant writing, Jason? Knock it all out at one time. Oh my God.
All right. Any other items on that? All right. The good news is the next couple topics should hopefully be pretty quick. I know we spent a lot of time on some of the earlier topics, but Brian, what I want you to do is introduce the document that you had given to me to upload to OneDrive on stabilization and kind of what you're looking for this committee to weigh in on related specifically to capital stabilization. And we're going to have this as a discussion. This isn't an FY22 warrant item, but this is going to be a longer term discussion. There's going to be other parties that absolutely have to be involved. But Brian, the one thing since I was appointed to the committee, at least in my conversations with Brian, this is usually the topic that comes up when it comes up related to capital, of how we'd really like to see the committee lean in and form a view on this. And we obviously had a lot of important work to get to this point, but I thought this was the right time to at least introduce the topic, especially for a lot of us that haven't thought about this before. And then we'll keep talking about it and figure out where we want to go. But I figured at least Brian can give an introduction, why towns do it, and why he is passionate about it, I guess is probably the right word, Brian, and go from there.
It's like eventually before I leave, employment for the town, this is gonna get done, maybe. Anyways, so capital stabilization funds, I think the committee, most of you are probably aware, towns are allowed to have stabilization funds for various purposes. And I'm gonna keep this brief. I agree with Jason. This is a conversation that's a longer conversation, so this is gonna be quick. But so the state specifically allows stabilization funds, general ones and capital ones. We have a general one that has about 600,000. Used to have about 4 million when I first started. Very interesting. I don't hear anyone that says they wish that they did not have that today, but make things a lot easier for next year. But so we spent that down to about half a million. But the original intent of stabilization was basically for capital expenses. And the wide, it's kind of obvious the reasoning behind it. The wide expenses that you can have, or the material expenses you can have for hook trucks and fire trucks and things of that nature, and buildings, require large investments from a year-to-year basis. So you can sometimes get quite a bit of expenses in one year that you didn't have in the next. So again, the name speaks for itself. Stabilization. You stabilize the tax rate, right? You keep it even from year to year, so we don't see those spikes up and down. A lot of towns, I was just looking on the DLS site today, because they do track stabilization funds. I couldn't find if they track capital in specific stabilization funds, but they track stabilization funds. So it's really interesting. You can manipulate the data to go by population and various other methods. And if you go just by population from, 7,500 to 13,000, 14,000 people, it is eye-opening seeing the amount of stabilization funds that other towns have compared to Southborough. We're on the low end. Let's put it that way. You'd be surprised. Some of the other towns that you wouldn't even think have large stabilization funds. So it is interesting. I know there's another flip side to some people who have said that these are not a good idea. You can just raise taxes in a year, and basically the power of taxation is good enough to just fund things if you want them. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think we all know that, like, we're struggling right now taking capital off, right? To the capital plan. We're talking about it tonight. So I think that speaks for itself that, if we had a stabilization fund, we may not be talking about which projects can we defer to next year again. And, what year we're going to get caught in when we defer, so many things that we're actually are going to have to make cuts to services. So I think it's a worthy topic to at least look into. I did supply Jason with and it's only draft. I just put together a sample what one may look like. You can take a look at it. I do have, Kathy's going to ask for the John Butler white paper. I found it today, by the way. So I'm going to send that to Jason tomorrow, if that's okay. And Jason, you could distribute it to the committee if you want.
Just upload it to OneDrive if you want.
It's already on our OneDrive, Jason, under the perm folder.
Ah, good. So there you go.
The first thing I put there, Brian, just so you know.
Okay.
Under advisories.
Under advisory, right?
All right, I will copy it over.
So take a look at that. I would pretty much, like to get a sense eventually from the committee if there's any interest in this. I mean, I don't think we should waste a lot of time on it if there isn't. It is not an FY22 suggestion, but it probably maybe an FY23. We probably wouldn't fund it until FY24 or 25 because you usually fund these things in the good years, not the bad years. So, I would just say, think about it a little bit and, read the papers. And then I think we can have a discussion down the road and just take the temperature of the committee and see if there's any interest in moving forward or if it's something that we just want to put off and stand aside and, Mark and myself can decide always down the road to, go to the selectmen directly or another avenue that maybe, we might want to propose it. So that's my recommendation for tonight. I'm going to keep it simple. There's no reason to take up more time than that.
So I have moved it from advisory's permanent folder to capital planning's permanent folder.
You
So unless
copied
someone has,
it.
what'd you say?
You didn't move
Yeah.
it, you copied it.
Copied, sorry, thank you. So my suggestion is, we all know the work of Mr. Butler. Let's everyone review that before we pepper Brian with questions, but unless someone really has a desire to ask him pointed questions on it tonight.
I just have one simple one. Ryan, our stabilization fund that we have and in comparison to other towns, is the road fund and the facilities fund included in that?
No,
So other towns, Jason, have a facility stabilization fund and a road stabilization fund. So we would look better compared to other towns if we included those.
Guys, you tell me, Andrew, you're saying they have 3 funds?
Like Westminster has like 7. They have capital equipment, building stabilization, technology stabilization, general stabilization, pension retirement stabilization, and road stabilization.
let's just start with one.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, if we're comparing apples to oranges, we have our road fund and we have our facilities
Right.
maintenance fund, which are kind of like stabilizations.
No, that's interesting.
So I'm looking forward to having a robust discussion because it's time to do this. It's been 10 years, but for maybe Joe and Jeff's benefit, can I just add 60 seconds worth of stuff, Jason? Then I'll stop. I know it's getting late. So I'm by far the oldest one on this, on Zoom, I'm sure. So about 10 years ago, there was a big discussion between the Board of Selectmen and Advisory as to the level of our general stabilization fund. We had a lot of excess money because we collected a whole lot of excess taxes one year for cars. We also collected a lot of revenue from telephone pole excise taxes that we hadn't had heretofore. So there was a lot of money, and that's how it got up to the $4 million. So there was a very heated discussion at town meeting that year about the philosophy about stabilization. And I'll just say that the advisory viewpoint won out, and we basically took the money out of stabilization at that meeting and put it into to the budget and cut it down. And it stayed, around $500,000 ever since then. So that's kind of your background as to why we're so low. And when you read the white paper, you'll understand more. So that's just kind of your preface to the white paper.
Thank you.
All right, everyone good on stabilization? Brian, you now have a standing agenda item. I know it's probably taken X
Love it.
number of years to get there, but we'll keep it top of mind and go from there. Capital project oversight. I did not have time to start to pencil out the public safety building process, but I did find something that would be very helpful. Jeff did offer offline to help take whatever we take from past experience and put it into some document. So just wanted to acknowledge Jeff for stepping up. So hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll have something to vet. And then on current capital projects, Carla did send me a spreadsheet of what's still open on capital projects. It is in the share drive. It doesn't have the amounts. Now, my guess, Andrew, is you could probably on the fly add the amounts of whatever you're looking at that came up with the road fund, but she did offer to go back in there and add the amounts because there are things like Fayetteville Playground, for example. My guess is it's still open because they just paved the basketball court, but I also don't know like where that came from versus the private donations, et cetera. So I'm going to wait for Carla to post that, and then we can decide at the next meeting whether there are any we want the BOS to consider having us oversee now versus waiting for what's on the docket for this coming town meeting. Questions on that? Lisa, did you raise your hand? Yes.
I did. Sorry. I was talking and not realizing I was muted. Just a question to this list. And again, I don't know, maybe it's a topic for another meeting, but I see that the golf course is on here. And when the golf course was originally done, and the golf course committee is kind of defunct at this point, I think there's one member currently left on there. One of the things that was talked about was a putting green. And I believe CPA has funds still left from the warrant article. And Mark, you could probably jump in and give more of an update on this. But my question is, and then you can jump in, Mark, is this something that Capital might be able to step in and oversee and get this piece done? And with that question, I'll let Mark give more information on what this is.
Well,
Or do you think it's not appropriate for here, Mark?
yeah, I don't necessarily think it's appropriate. I've had, I've reached out to the, so let me back up. A quick conversation with Andrew Mills today. They do have additional funds remaining in the CPC article from the golf course improvements. One of the additional things they had talked about doing was a practice putting green. And today I reached out to the architect, the golf architect who did the golf course improvements. The second architect, not the first architect, second architect, did a great job. We came in under bid, and hopefully in the next couple of days we'll connect and see what we can do for the project. I think there's money left to do it. I don't think it's very big. I think it's really already been decided where it's going to go. There's not a whole lot of space in order to put it. I just don't know that it's really substantive, and for the committee to try to, get some, I don't know. I just don't, I don't think there's any value to be gained through the oversight, for this particular issue. I think there may be other things which I'll hold right now, that may fit the bill better, for the committee to get a little bit of hands-on for some of the oversight.
Okay. I just wondered, Mark, because again, the golf court committee is kind of defunct at this time, and I know the monies are there. So if you think there's already a path forward, then I withdraw my question.
Yeah, I think, and given the experience that I've had with this architect, it also includes construction oversight, and he really did a great job last time. We came in a little bit under budget and everything in that, so I've got pretty good faith with a limited track record with this particular vendor.
Okay, I withdraw my question, Jason. Sorry.
Okay. There anything else that anyone wanted to discuss on that item, or you want to see the amounts? I think the only fully funded one is going to be the lights for Mooney and Neary.
The amounts and the funding source.
Yes.
Well, and how much has been spent of the amount?
Yeah. So we'll get original authorization, expenditures, balance remaining. That capture everything?
Yep.
I think that the fund, yeah, because Kathy, you're saying like some of these are potentially ambulance funds, some of them water funds, some of them are general fund, and then you obviously have CPA projects are clearly delineated.
So it's the CPA ones that, they have oversight from CPC. So I would want to do that. So that's why I just said, let's make sure we know what the funding is, and then we'll know which ones we probably should look at. That will tell us something.
Yeah, and they have the funding authorization, but I think part of it also goes to process, et cetera, of how to get it from start to finish. And again, it's how we collaborate, right? Not necessarily pull one card or another. So, all right, we're almost there. ClearGov update, far more positive update than last time. So Brian and I had a conversation with the relationship manager for the town related to our feedback on capital. I give them credit for their honesty. They basically admitted that the capital module was really a budget book module, and it never should have been marketed as a capital module. And the screens that we basically were shown as part of the demo were, there wasn't the backup behind it. The good news is they fully acknowledged it, right? So we haven't paid anything for it yet, right, Brian? I think was conclusion A. Conclusion B was they are rolling out a new product at the end of the month that is actually a real capital budgeting model that allows, like for example, like as we did our around the horn tonight, we could have been showing what that would have done short term and long term to the capital budget, right? So Joe, I think based on some of your inquiries, right, like in terms of how you fund things, it looks like a lot more what we were actually expecting we were going to get. Of course, it's a separate module, so there's a separate user fee. And as we all know, ClearGov was covered predominantly year one through a grant. So now part of the town's operational budget is now absorbing this going forward. So there's two questions at hand that will be at hand. One is Mark, Brian, and their team that handle the budget book, in particular Ms. Esposito, are actually going to go through some training to see whether the budget book module is worthwhile. If it's not, then we're just not going to renew that package for next year. If it is, and there's a valuable benefit, then they'll be able to justify that. And if they did, we've been able to. We've been able to get a very significant discount, as I'll call it, a pilot user moving forward that they are going to hold for a while. They didn't specify the term, but it's not a 1 year sort of hold in terms of fee. We haven't negotiated yet, but that's just what they offered without us negotiating it. So that's why I'm being careful with what I'm saying. But I think there's a lot more positive update to come the end of February. So we're not going to talk about ClearGov again until they come out with this capital module. And then I want to think about as a committee how we make sure it's something we want to invest in. But I don't know, Brian, if you have any other thoughts of how that conversation went.
No, I think you hit it spot on, and I think you negotiated a pretty good deal if we do want to move forward with it. So I think we'll analyze that at the end of February and March.
I may have said that we have a vocal committee that would be willing to provide feedback, something along those lines. Any comments on ClearGov? All right, public comment. Seeing none. The only other business that I will just mention is there are 3 residents that have now indicated interest in this committee. We do have 1 open seat, as you all know. All do have engineering background. I've spoken to 2 out of the 3. The other 3 didn't have, the third one didn't have any questions. And they'll be appearing before the Board of Selectmen at their first meeting in February, is my understanding, for interviews. So it'll be up to them to decide if any of them fit the bill of what we're looking for and whether they want to appoint them. So we may at our next meeting. Mark, are they on for next week?
I'll know more tomorrow at about 10:30, but at this
Okay.
point, I've got them slated in the draft agenda.
So presuming that continues as is, we may or may not have one new member at the next meeting. Any other business? Kathy?
So I'd like to add the following to one of our future agendas. It doesn't have to be next time, but sometime soon. I want to put the topic of solar paneled roofs on our agenda.
Okay. Noted. Anything else? Remember, if you have agenda topics, I'm not posting more than a week before. So the Monday before a future meeting, just let me know and I'll add them. Next meeting will be 2 weeks from tonight, unless anyone has any objection. I just extended our invite. I know as everyone accepted, so assuming there wasn't any issues with that.
That started at 7 o'clock.
7:30. Did I do 7?
Yeah.
I will change it to 7:30. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you.
That half an hour does make a difference. Any other business? All right, I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lisa. Roll call. Braccio.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Park.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski is aye. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Kathy, before you go, Kathy, did you get your hair cut?
I did.
It looks very nice, by the way. I wanted to tell you that before we left.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
I'll
Everybody,
send- I'll send you what we were talking about.
yes, please do.